Trials and troubles and too much sin. Test will occur. Running a race we will never win without the word.
Good morning, good day, good evening, good overnight, whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome once again to Just Thoughts. Tonight we're not going to do a Bible study. We're just going to visit a little while, have a little talk, a little chat here. We're going to talk about current events, things going on in the world today. I'm going to entitle this Hysteria and Control. Now, most of you that listen to me know that sometimes I do get a little bit angry with the things going on in the world. I will say that if you're listening to this and you are happy and completely content with your life and you're happy in this world, then you're probably not awake to what's going on. Because if you're one of Christ's own, you're not of this world. You don't belong in this world other than the fact that God has put us here to do a certain job. That is to say, to stand up to the Antichrist when he comes and to teach, like I often do, to lay out the truth for people, to let them decide for themselves whether they like what they're hearing, whether they want to study more, or whether they just want to not listen at all. But today, again, we're going to be talking about the hysteria that's going on and the control that's being taken by the powers that be. That is to say, the elite, or, for those of you who know, the Kenites. Now, the political and the economical machine, that is to say, the political and economical branch of the four hidden dynasties, are churning away. It has been said that at any given time we're only 3 meals away from total anarchy. And we have seen examples of just how true that is in modern times with events like Hurricane Andrew or Hurricane Katrina or various other disasters around the world. And we're seeing similar things even now with this coronavirus. Why am I bringing this to the forefront right now? Well, things are concerning me which I see going on. I would urge anyone listening to this to take the time here on YouTube to watch all of a video called Hurricane Andrew as it happened. And be especially vigilant to watch it all the way to the end. And you will see just what kind of chaos and inhumanity, that is to say, man's inhumanity, can ensue only hours or days after such a tragedy. Now, we know that when the Antichrist comes, that he comes in peacefully and prosperously, as written of him, and that he will personify all we would expect Jesus Christ to be. But before that time is what I'm focusing on for the moment. In other words, I want to talk about the control that's being taken from us day by day, the freedoms that are being taken from us. Of course, you already know that they've removed prayer in schools, that most of the people in the world now seem to be more of a secular or agnostic nature than to say Christian, and of the Christians, very few know the real truth. The political system is taking more and more control with each one of these events that happens. So it doesn't matter. You know, it could be the Boston bombing, or the Parkland school shooting, or church shootings, or synagogue attacks, or the aforementioned hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, fires, floods. It matters not. Now, I remember when the Boston bombing happened, in other words, the Boston Marathon, When that event happened, whether it was real or faked, does not matter to this conversation. There are people on both sides of that argument, and it really doesn't matter about what I'm talking about. What does matter is that was the first time I had ever seen armed officers of the law with assault rifles enter into households to search without any hint of a warrant. And no one said a thing, because after all, they were chasing down a criminal. However, the warning signs were there, and a few of us who knew what was happening, that is to say the ramifications of these actions were pushing towards, did voice our opinions at the time. Now we have the coronavirus. Just as we have had all those that came before it. The swine flu, the H1N1 virus, that is to say the bird flu, the Ebola, West Nile virus, Zika virus, and a host of others which rear their heads every few years. And with every one that happens, there is more and more media hype. And more rights and more freedoms are sacrificed to protect us from ourselves, or so we are told. Now, in reality, I know several people in the medical field, and they believe that the coronavirus is not as dangerous as we've been led to believe. I have been told by at least 2 people that the coronavirus has a mortality rate of 3%, which is only slightly higher than the normal influenza or flu virus, which comes out every season, that is to say every year, which is rated at 2% mortality. And usually in both cases, corona or regular influenza, the victims are more often the elderly or the young, or just those with poor immune systems. Yet the coronavirus, or COVID-19, as it's called, is being hyped as the newest, most threatening pandemic which is going to kill us all. This is the first time that I can remember that all sports gatherings, that is to say soccer, baseball, what have you, football's out of season naturally, NASCAR races, and rock concerts, gatherings of people over 1,000, in some cases 250 in certain states, are no longer being allowed. And that is what you call the government telling us what we may or may not do. Now, I wonder what would happen, how this would apply, let's say in November. In other words, when it's time to vote, with whatever comes down the pike next. Just look at the hysteria that the media hype is causing around the world. I mean, everywhere you go now, and I know people all over the country, I've been talking to them, toilet paper is out of stock. My goodness me, why does everybody need so much toilet paper with this? Hand sanitizers, dishwashing detergents, alcohol, hydrogen peroxide are all sold out. Meats and foods, dry foods, are disappearing. And places like Walmart and other stores are charging more for water in some areas. In other words, they're price gouging. And people are running out and panic buying everything they can. Why? Because they think something big and bad is going to happen. And why? Well, because they're scared. They're scared because they've been trained to believe what the media tells them. And they don't think for themselves. They don't look into the numbers. And they don't recognize the pattern that goes on about every 2-year cycle. There's always a new flu, always some new threat. A couple of years ago, they even said that there was a new strain of the bubonic plague. Turned out to be nothing. And if you look past that, how about what's going on with our stock market? I mean, it had risen up to 29,000 and something. Gone up to a new height. Then all of a sudden it plunged down. Why? Because primarily it was falsely inflated in the first place. So it has to fail and will fail eventually, one way or the other. It's not sustainable. There are market experts out there saying that this is not sustainable. They're looking at the bond market, they're looking at the stock market, they're looking everywhere, and they're all claiming that this is not sustainable. They're saying, like every overinflated tire, it will eventually blow out. And it's fitly joined together with all the markets of the world. That is to say, our stock exchange. It's fitly joined to all the markets of the world, which is why when one fails, they all suffer or they all fail. Everybody suffers. Global economy is just what it sounds like. We are now as dependent on the rest of the world as they are on us, even though we are the most powerful nation. And this has been slowly, carefully, and methodically planned out, and now it's coming to pass. In the days of old America, that is to say 1800s, 1900s, early 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, if the stock market failed, it affected only the United States. But now, with all the centralized banks banding together, that is to say being knit together, and with them buying up gold and silver, palladium, platinum, as they have for generations, today they have become the richest people in the world and the ruling class of elite. And again, you know who they are, the aforementioned sons of Cain. That is to say, most of them. Others are just greedy. Yet, they set the bar. They determine your interest rates. They determine economies, whether they will be strong or weak. Let me tell you how the Federal Reserve works. A lot of people don't know that the Federal Reserve is not federal. In other words, it does not belong to the United States of America. It is a private bank. And this private bank, as well as the other centralized banks around the world, which are in concert with it, make money off every single Federal Reserve note spent around the world. That is, for every United States dollar that is used around the world, the Federal Reserve makes interest. And it may only be a few cents from every dollar. But when you are talking billions, if not in fact trillions of dollars, guess how much interest the Federal Reserve are earning on a daily basis? It is an incredible amount. So yes, they can inflate any economy by printing money, even in a country which has no precious metal to back up those federal notes, like our own. And they are printed up as much as the Federal Reserve wants, and they're doing so to put all nations into debt unto them. And that's why all the centralized banks are working together. This is how inevitably they will economically bring about the New World Order. And since the US dollar is the global standard around the world, that is to say around the entire globe, and it is the standard by which all others are weighed, that is to say currency, and is likewise spendable in 95% of the world, then that makes our Federal Reserve the richest, most powerful entity ever to exist as far as a monetary group of elite. And then again, when we consider all the centralized banks of the world are part of this group, then the reach of the Federal Reserve goes far beyond our borders. And it's not hard to see how it knits the global economy together so that, again, if one portion of it fails, they all fail. If the stock market in Japan falls, it falls in America. If the stock market in Europe falls, it falls in America. That's because we're globally knit together. Now, most of us can see this coming. And like I said, a lot of experts are putting out videos talking about how to prepare for this. Of course, you need to prepare by buying silver and gold. That is to say, tangible assets, not notes that say you own silver and gold, but rather go to your local coin store and buy silver and gold. You can buy silver rounds, junk silver. You can buy pre-1964 denominations, nickels, dimes, quarters, 50-cent pieces, dollars. They're all 92% silver. But in this way, you can protect yourself. And of course, the best way to protect yourself is to stock up and be ready for these things with months' worth of food and supplies. This doesn't mean you have to become a hoarder, but gradually go out and buy things as you need them. Canned goods, which are long shelf life. Dry goods, which are long shelf life. There are even many companies which offer products that have 30-year, 25-year, 15-year shelf life. So the answer is always to be prepared, just as Joseph prepared Egypt for the 7 years of famine. Now, besides these things, which are self-evident, if you're watching television or watching streaming media such as Netflix or Hulu or various other things, along with cable TV, you probably have noticed that most everything out there is total brainwashing on television or in the movies. And of course, like I said, the aforementioned, your favorite streaming media sites. All of their shows push several agendas, such as reverse racism, radical feminism, social justice, woke, feel-good politics. In other words, feel-good social justice. They push the gay, transgender, bisexual, and or other alternative lifestyles as if they are cutting edge, as if they're brave, as if they're heroic, as if they're a fight for the oppressed against a perceived oppressor. When the real truth is that they are doing nothing more than putting these lifestyles on pedestals and then trying to cram this perversion of every kind down our throats. And people are paying hand over fist for things like Netflix or Hulu or other channels which load them up with this filth. You know, it occurred to me recently, not that it's not occurred to me before, but again, it's occurred to me, that New World Order is called that for more reason than the obvious. It's not just a total takeover of the world in a New World Order. It is a new order, whereby it is the removal of the old order which was before. And when I say the old order, I mean morality, decency, Christian ideals, law-abiding ideas and lifestyle, true freedom, and real justice. Getting rid of those things which have been. And of course it's happened slowly. If it happened overnight, people would be incensed and they would riot. But no, the Kenites are wise to the ways of the world, and they take it an inch at a time, and eventually an inch becomes a foot, and a foot becomes a yard, and next thing you know, it's everywhere and everything. Once the door was opened to these lifestyles, it was never going to be closed again. Same thing with abortion. You know, speaking of the Federal Reserve, it is no wonder that the Federal Reserve notes, that is to say our dollar bills, have a pyramid with the all-seeing eye on them, which everyone equates to the Masonic symbol, which it is. But they also have the phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum, which means, according to several translations, a new order dawns, or a new order begins. But if you go into the Latin, that is to say the Latin from the Greek, for each one of these words, it better translates as a new order knit together generationally, even a second dissension. The etymology of the word novus comes from Pro-Italic naos, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European nuos, and cognates include Old English new or new, as we speak it now. Ancient Greek would be neos, or Proto-Slavic would be novab, or nova, and Sanskrit has it as nava. It all comes down from the same word. In other words, it's handed down from Latin. Naos falls into the category of nuus, which means new, to specific conditions which develop in Latin, namely the O and the W, being the first of the syllables, whereas de nuad means anew, and was changed to de nuo, new or brand new. So novus in its full meaning means new or brand new. In other words, you can find this in, if you think of Scotland being Scotia, if you talk about New Scotland, it's pronounced Nova Scotia in Canada. And it means the same thing, New Scotland. Now, the etymology of the word ordo is Latin, Greek, and it means an order, a rank, or a class. It may even refer to a musical phrase constructed from one or more statements of rhythmic mode pattern ending in a rest. In other words, to put forth an order of things, as building a song. In other words, an order. And the etymology, excuse my voice, maybe I have the coronavirus, gee, I don't know. Or maybe it's just because I'm a smoker. Either way, the etymology for seclorum comes from seclum, a genitive of secli, which means second dissension. The second dissension. You can go and look this up. I'm not making this up. It comes possibly from the Proto-Indo-European say to sew, or from shay, which means to bind or to knit or to tie together, to tie to or to connect. Tiam is an instrumental suffix, wherein Latin culum, in the sense of successive generations being linked together over time. In other words, novus ordo seclorum. So what do we have here? We've got something that has been being built up over generations. And it's funny to me that they've got the all-seeing eye on top of the pyramid, which is the pinnacle, and it says a second dissension. A second dissension of what? I don't know, the false Christ, maybe. Now, in the other context of this, and I'm not talking about Novus Ordo Seclorum now, I'm changing subjects here a little bit. When we speak of the educational branch of the four hidden dynasties, it now extends far beyond school grounds or college campuses. It is where radicals push socialist agenda, and it extends beyond, like I said, schools and college campuses. And they're pushing it on all the world. It exists in the media and in the entertainment industry, as aforementioned. Entertainment is where 90% of actors in this country are leftists or are pro-left, whether lightly or heavily. By light, I mean they refer to themselves as liberals. By heavy, I mean they are full-blown socialist or communist. And the odd thing about them is, all of these people got rich off the system of capitalism, which they claim to hate. But they now stand up on their red carpets and under the limelight and tell us how wicked and evil we are for being capitalist and seeking wealth by work. Are they not hypocrites, as Christ called the scribes and Pharisees? Do they not say, but themselves not do? In other words, they're telling you how to live. They're rich, they've got nothing to worry about. But they're telling you what not to do. They're trying to push socialism on you, a system which has failed everywhere it's been tried. But they don't care because they've got plenty of money and they can hobnob with all their star friends. You know, as alluded to in the last study I did and many others, quoted by Christ, Jesus said, the scribes and Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, which means they hand down and interpret the law. They interpret the Word of God. They dispense justice, or I should say their brand of justice, and they control money and commerce. Now, doesn't that sound a lot like what we just got through talking about? Knitting together a system, a new order. Our freedom today is largely an illusion, a pale version of what once was. Because today, you must work to live, unless, of course, you get special preference. In other words, unless you're one of these highly paid actors, and of course they do work. I'm sure it does take some training to learn how to act. I myself worked in show business for a little while, attempting to make a indie film. I learned a lot of things about the industry. But in today's world, you must work to live. Unless you have money, or unless you are minority enough to be pandered to. And then you get special preference. And you know, there's nothing racist in that statement either. It is true that many people use their status as a minority or as a perceived minority, no matter if it's race or sexual preference, to get favors and or entitlements from those who want their votes and are willing to pander to them. Because these people are hungering for more power and more wealth. Cain's children have been very busy for quite a few generations to bring these things about. They push agenda after agenda after agenda on us. They test us to see what we will allow. They false flag us with real or staged tragedies, and they use ever more opportunities, they use every opportunity to raise themselves up in even more power. And when I say they test us, I mean everything that happens in this country, whether it's a hurricane, whether it's a natural disaster like earthquakes or forest fires or what have you. Any kind of opportunity they can use to call out the National Guard, to call out the Army, and like I aforementioned in the Boston bombing, to charge into people's houses 12 at a time carrying high-powered rifles with no warrant. What is it that's empowering them to do this? Well, I'll tell you what's empowering them to do this. It's the fact that people are allowing it. They're getting used to it. They're being conditioned to allow it. Now, there are those of us that support law enforcement. My father was a police officer. When I was young and rebellious, I did stupid things, and the cops, of course, pulled me over and wrote me many tickets and harassed me all the time because I had a loud, obnoxious Mustang, which they didn't like. But I learned respect for the law. My old man always told me when a policeman pulls you over, you get out and you say, yes, sir, no, sir. But you always protect your rights. If they ask you if you want your vehicle searched, unless they have probable cause, they've got no reason to search your vehicle. But if they have probable cause, then do what Christ told you to do and obey the law. In other words, we are to obey civil law. Why? Because we are of little use to God if we're in jail, unless we're meant to be a person who goes in there and ministers to prisoners who are not being fed the Word of God. But that's up to our Father. Now, this elite class are controlling things from afar. They don't dirty their own hands. They've got all kinds of little community organized groups. And they've got all kinds of false fronts, and I've talked about this for years. You know, do you really think for one moment that Antifa, which is a worldwide group, is just a bunch of misled college and high school kids who have nothing better to do? No, they're being organized from the very top. They're being brainwashed, and they think that they have a just and valid cause in pushing their agenda of anarchy and or socialism. Do you actually believe that what recently passed just days ago with National Women's Day was a fluke or just some kind of coincidence? If you don't know what I'm talking about, maybe you should go on and look at the news. There were incidents that happened around the world on National Women's Day. Incidents of violence and displays of ultra-radical feminist hatred towards men and towards patriarchy. This happened around the world, and it happened in concert. You think that happened by complete coincidence? No, it was organized worldwide. Much like many things are organized worldwide. All of these people had the same agenda, no matter where these so-called protests took place or what country they were in. Now, it was wrapped up for us nice and pretty, and it was hashtagged, and it became a social media frenzy, gone viral, and it was trending everywhere. And it was made to look like this day was highlighting the accomplishments of women down through the ages, which was supposedly its intention. But that is anything but what actually happened. Instead, riotous acts of violence ensued with perverse behavior, which was manifested in the very streets where some of these events took place. And it was all covered up by the media, unless, of course, you have a few of the media outlets or you have the internet and you know the right places to look. You see, to have a new order, such as they're trying to build here, that is to say, the coming of Babylon, to have a new order, you must first destroy the old order. And this is exactly what Lucifer attempted to do at the Catable or Catabole, where he thought to claim God's mercy seat for himself. In other words, Lucifer tried to overthrow God and was thusly afterwards called Satan, which means the adversary. You know, we're all born into this life pretty much the same way. We have the souls that we've always had, and God puts the souls where He puts them. But people are not radicalized by nature. They must be led to drink of the poison which destroys cultures, and then act on it. And most of the time they're unsure as to what they are even doing or standing for. You know, I don't know if any of you watch Crowder, Steven Crowder, Louder with Crowder, or some of these other people, Mark Dice, when they go out and question these people and ask them what they're protesting for. They can't even answer. All they can do is yell hateful things. When they do sit down and talk to people, half of these people don't even know what they're talking about. They're not even educated to American history. They don't know what America is about. All they know is that they're angry about something, and they need to show their anger. And the elite, that is to say the Kenites, know that in order to ruin the way things have been, they must create false narratives, they must throw accusations, they must lay blame, and they must change hearts from seeking awareness via light, that is to say from our Father's Word, or even just being knowledgeable of what's going on around you, to the deception of darkness, which is to say having the wool pulled over people's eyes so that they will do the bidding of these powerful elite. They have to destroy the traditional, natural roles of sexuality and the family unit, which God has set forth. And they do this by preying on the weaknesses which are inherent in the human flesh. So they subtly, by calling things celebrations, or fights for freedom, or strides for equality, push their ideals. And their fights are not for equality. They are for perversion, or for the removal of freedoms. You know, they celebrate pride. They go around and wave their little rainbow flags. They celebrate gay pride, lesbian pride, transgender pride, feminist pride, pride in socialism. A failed system which has ruined virtually every place it's ever been used. And some people will dispute that and say, well, not in Sweden, not in Norway, not in Canada. Try buying a house in Canada. You know, I used to watch a show on HGTV, and I wondered, how could these people be paying $655,000 for a little one-story house? Well, it's because it's a socialist nation. The same house in my home state that these people are paying $655,000 for in Canada would sell for maybe $180,000, $200,000. And they don't see a problem. Why? Because they're told that they get free health care. But it's not free. Somebody's paying for it. And actually, it's them paying for it, and they're just too blind to see it. Anything and all things which destroy God's natural order and the freedoms which God Himself gave us and outlined for us in His Word, not to mention the laws which God set forth for us, are unholy. So, if you've got a bunch of secular socialists out there trying to run your government, what kind of government do you think you're going to get? Do you think they're going to preserve Christianity? No, they're not going to. Again, they will become ultra-religious whenever the Antichrist gets here. Oh, they're going to be on their knees begging the false Christ for forgiveness because they believe he is Christ. And the trap is already set for them. But right now, they're simply trying to take your rights away from you and your money away from you via taxation and give it to a bunch of people that do not even belong in the nation. The same thing has happened in Europe, where Muslims have come in such numbers till there are places in London and in England where people are afraid to go. Just like here in America. There are places in America where people are afraid to go because of Muslims. Now, does that make all Muslims evil? No, it does not. But there are places in our country and in Europe where, of course, when the Muslims migrate into the country, it's going to cease to be a Christian country. Why? Because they're going to build mosques. And they're going to be radical about their religion. Again, do not judge every Muslim by these words. There are peaceful people upon this earth who happen to be Islamic. good people. So you never want to lump everyone into one sum. You know, that goes for Christians too, because a look back at Christianity will show you that Christians have done some pretty horrible things since the days Christ walked the earth, down through history. But these elite and their radical pundits relabel everything which is good as evil. They revise knowledge and turn it into ignorance. They use every unfair or unjust event which has ever happened in history to constantly point out how unjust people can be, specifically Caucasians. And they make changes for the worse and not for the better. Now, I said specifically Caucasians, but I'll tell you one thing that has come about of late. African American people, that is to say blacks, Hispanic people, are being labeled as racist now by leftist Democrats. And you might sit there and laugh to yourself and say, how can the Democrats, which claim that blacks cannot be racist and Hispanics cannot be racist, claim that Hispanics and blacks are racist? Well, they change their shirts as far as what they stand for as easily as you change yours. In other words, what they might stand for now, they won't stand for tomorrow or maybe a week from now. So if you disagree with their socialist politics, then you have become, if you're black, you have become an Uncle Tom to them. And if you're Hispanic, you have sold out your Latin heritage. And it's all a damnable lie. It is a reordering of the role of mankind in the world. And speaking of reordering the role of mankind in the world, how about the role of man in the world? Liberals, that is to say leftists, I really shouldn't say liberals because true liberals do not act this way. It is progressive, hard left leftists that do this. But if they don't like something like more males in more power, that's not to say that there aren't women out there that can do the same jobs and have just as many brains as the men. Okay? This is not a sexist thing. I know women out there that are 10 times smarter than their soulmates. I know women out there that are 10 times tougher than some of the guys I went to school with that were bullies. But in order to change things, they relabel stuff, and they use phrases like male-dominated to garner support from those who already hate the norm. In other words, they hate the natural order. They hate the order that God put out. Now again, I'm not being sexist in saying this, but it is the order that God put out that man is to be the head of the household. Unless he's too stupid to be, then the woman is to be the head of the household. But man is supposed to be the breadwinner and the protector of his family. The woman is supposed to be the nest builder. This does not mean she cannot work. It doesn't mean she can't have a career. It doesn't mean she can't make more money than the man. It doesn't mean anything like that. But there is a natural order to things, which has been being changed. I know many strong women Bible teachers, and they can hold their own against any male pastor or teacher or what have you that comes down the pike that wants to argue with them. And there are women in our military that are just as capable as any man. Again, this is not a sexist argument. All I'm saying here is that radical feminism is changing the natural order of things. They change your television and your movie heroes into pundits for their causes, so you will more easily accept their perverted and skewed way of thinking. In other words, your male role models are changed into females. Okay, we have many movies which have come out over the years where there have been female leads and they're a strong character. And that's as it should be. There should be strong characters of every race and the two genders. And they should be role models. But what is going on instead of that? Well, they're changing the complete status quo. Look at what they have done to Doctor Who. Okay, Doctor Who was a favorite TV show of mine for years. You know, I loved watching the time-traveling Doctor Who go from place to place in the universe. Even though it's sci-fi, it's what inspired me to write my book, The Iconic Time Box. But what did they do to the Doctor? Well, they changed the Doctor into a woman. Okay? They already had strong female characters in Doctor Who. They already had strong female Time Lords in Doctor Who, but that was not enough. No, they had to atone for the Doctor being a male. And now they have changed the Doctor Who into a woman, and not only that, they have rewritten the Doctor Who history to where all of the original Doctors were women, and for some sin that the Doctor's done, now he's become a man, or had become a man. Likewise with Captain Marvel. You know, when I grew up, the character that they now call Shazam simply said the word Shazam, which turned him into Captain Marvel. Now Captain Marvel is a woman. You know, the Ghostbusters. They came out with an all-female version of Ghostbusters. Now, the funny thing about this, and there's a host of other shows where they've changed the characters to women, and mostly they fail. In other words, they're no good. And why? Because they're pushing the so-called woke social justice agenda. I have nothing wrong, or I find nothing wrong with strong female characters in movies. But now, on television and in the movies, you've got women which are 5 foot nothing, which weigh about 110 pounds wet, which, because of what the script says and because of what the movie is laid out to be, beat the pure hell out of a muscular 6'5" man who is, of course, an evil antagonist of the movie that they're starring in. In other words, it's the changing of the order. Nothing wrong with strong female characters. I see no problem with that at all. But when they start replacing the males with females, and they do away with the traditional, it is simply showing you what the overall plan is. They're trying to do away with the patriarchy of men. They're destroying the family. The single parent family has now become the most prevalent family that there is. And in these shows, also, they always have to put a gay or lesbian character, or maybe even transgender, into your favorite movie and or TV show or streaming TV show. And of course, they make these characters benevolent and lovable characters. And then they have someone attempt to oppress them on screen right before your eyes, so you've got a reason to be enraged. They are destroying the family unit in this way. And through the freebies and entitlements that they give to people. In other words, they pay single mothers now not to disclose who the biological father of their babies are, so that they can receive payments to raise their children and keep the father from having to pay his fair share, so that he's not held accountable. Now, you may think that I'm making a big deal over nothing, or that I'm joking about this. But I witnessed these things when I was growing up. Only, I didn't know what I was seeing at that time. But, year after year, unwed mothers showed up at a little small hospital in our town where members of my family worked. And they were given papers to sign. And these papers stated that in order for them to get financial assistance, which is to say welfare checks or food stamps from the government, they had to not know who their baby's daddy was. And so they signed off on these papers and did not name the father of the child so that they could get free money while the baby's daddy went held unaccountable and was never made to pay child support. And these women did know who their baby's daddies were. They knew who they had sex with. And in later years, we have developed DNA so that it would be easy to tell who the father is. But they still hold to this old law. So they withheld this information so that they could receive their checks from the government. The end result over a period of decades was that more and more illegitimate children were born. In other words, more single-parent families were born, and more people were added to the welfare rolls, and more kids grew up in single-parent families in broken homes and committed more crimes. This is not to say that there weren't the exceptions. Not every kid who grew up in a single-parent family grew up badly. In fact, some grew up to do great things. But overall, most of them grew up to become gang thugs, or drug dealers, or people who wrecked their own lives on drugs, or wrecked other people's lives, or spent time in jail for this or that or the other. And do you know who paid for all of this? Well, I'll tell you. It was you, my friend. You, the law-abiding, job-holding taxpayer. You worked for a living to pay for your family, and your taxes were taken from you to pay for their family so that they could have freebies from the government. And many of you had to hold down 2 jobs or suffered by not having enough to pay your own bills. Unless, of course, you did work 2 or even 3 jobs. And they took away the fruits of your labors. You know, a lot of people who had to work these long, tedious, arduous hours died before their retirement. They never saw the fruits of their labors. They had planned for a happy life. They had gotten married. They had grown up in simpler times. They had raised children. And they had labored in vain because they died before retirement. They were, in fact, slaves to the system. Again, the illusion of freedom. And it was all perfectly legal and still is. And what I'm talking about is only one small hospital in one small town in a rural county. And if you take that and multiply it by every state in the Union of the United States of America, and every hospital in every state, imagine what the bill for that is. Imagine how we got so far into debt. Why is taxation so high? Well, this is only one small example of how mollycoddling has ruined the family unit and caused people to have their freedoms and rights to earn in the capitalist system taken away from them and had their money redistributed to others. You know, I've said it before, we already live in a socialist nation. Whether people want to hear that or not, we already live in a socialist nation. Because when it is legal for your government to come and take your money, or to take money that you have put into a 401k or into an annuity and you try to take your money out of that 401k or that annuity early, and they take half of it to punish you, that makes this a socialist nation. When you are forced to pay for people who will not work, but know how to have sex and produce children and won't name the father, then you're living in a socialist nation. When you are forced to pay for illegals that come across the border and have children on this soil, and you are forced to raise those children and take care of those families, this is a socialist nation. People today, overall, cannot earn enough to make ends meet unless they are in a union or unless they attend some college. And either way, it's damaging because they are controlled. Unions make them pay dues and usually force their members to vote for certain candidates which the union supports. And those union dues, in large proportion, go to support 99% of the same candidates. And 99% of the time, they are candidates of the left wing. They are leftist. They are progressive. They are socialists. Now, this is not to say that all unions are bad. Some do good service and help people to get fair money for the work that they do. But most of the big unions are all part of the big agenda to socialize this nation. And I have known a host of people who have had to deal with these unions. They have been bullied. They have been threatened. They have had to pay a large proportion of their paychecks. And if they tried to leave the union, they were beaten. They had their property destroyed, whether it was their car, whether they had their windows bashed in. Some of them were firebombed. In other words, it amounts to the same thing that we're seeing now with Antifa. Anarchy. Chaos. And colleges, by the way, are of the same ilk. That is to say, if one attends college now, they will either be brainwashed with leftist ideology or secular ideology. And if they dare to speak out and stand up to it, unless they have enough conservatives in school with them to form a big enough group, they will be failed if they dare to offer a conservative, capitalist, patriotic, or Christian point of view. But nobody really talks about that very much. I mean, it's been showed to you, like I said, if you know the right sources to go to, online, on YouTube to look, you can see what's going on our school campuses and our college campuses. You can see these ignorant youth walking around who know nothing about American history other than slavery. They don't know when the Civil War was fought. They think they know why it was fought, but naturally because of slavery. They don't know when the Revolutionary War was fought. They don't know about the War of 1812, the Spanish-American War. They don't know about World War I, World War II. They don't know about Vietnam, really, or Korea. They have no clue as to these things. And they're history majors. How is that even possible? They know verses from the Quran. They know Jewish history, at least in some part. But they don't know American history. They don't know Anglo-Saxon history. They don't know the history of Europe. They don't even know from where they came. And again, it's all completely legal and allowed. It's encouraged. Now, again, this is not to say that there are not a few good colleges out there which allow all points of view and do promote fairness but they are few and far between. And then we move on. We have the doom and gloomers. That group that constantly tells us how mankind will destroy himself or what big next thing is poised to happen to the earth. A mega tornado, an asteroid impact, a supervolcano, a mega tsunami, a mega quake, or global warming. And again, we have seen what happens when a big disaster does happen, like a Hurricane Andrew or a Hurricane Katrina or various other natural events like the fires in California. We see the looting that goes on. We see how law is thrown out the window and human decency is thrown out the window. And yet, with all of this, we are told that we should not have the right to bear arms to protect ourselves and our property. And as a matter of fact, if you dare to shoot someone on your property and they are not inside your house, at least in our state, you will go to jail for that. And you will be charged with some degree of murder. Probably not murder in the first degree, but you will be charged with manslaughter or second-degree murder or something similar. Again, watch the video called Hurricane Andrew as it happened, and watch what happened in Miami. Or watch one about Katrina and watch what happened there. Now, I realize that Katrina and other storms like in Texas, Harvey, and Irma here in Florida, and others, can bring out the best in people as well as it can bring out the worst. But these people lose all sense of right and wrong, if they ever even had it, once this happens. And if we dare to speak out against the fools and super morons who espouse this ignorance, that is to say that we should not have the right to bear arms or our religious freedoms, then we are labeled as radical, draconian, hate-filled, or even as terrorists in some cases. While it is overwhelmingly apparent to those of you who can see, that is to say, that have eyes to see and ears to hear, these other ignorant creatures and sheep walking around do not see it. They do not understand what these simple-minded morons who rule over us are doing. They do not realize that these people are agendized buffoons. And they continue to be elected and re-elected. You know, something is rotten in Denmark to me already with the 2020 election going in. It looks like to me that the Democratic Party has imploded and self-destructed. I mean, first of all, you've got Joe Biden. Okay? It should be clear to anyone that's seen Joe, even though the media is trying to cover for him, that he is completely senile and has no idea where he is even at times, or even the words that he is speaking. And then you've got Bernie Sanders, the devout socialist, who wants communism for this country, though he waves an American flag. And you've got Elizabeth Pocahontas Warren, who's another hard leftist. And you've got all these people in the field right now. And all of them are showing the most ignorant arguments. I mean, you know, if I was in the Democratic Party right now, which I never would be, but if I was, I would be putting forth candidates that have new ideas about the ways to do things that pretty much line up with how Americans showed them in 2016 what can happen once you build up enough pressure against the things which are right. In other words, what happened? Well, Donald Trump got elected. Why did Donald Trump get elected? Well, a lot of people say it was because he was the lesser of two evils. I know when I voted, that's what I was doing, voting for the lesser of two evils. But the real reason that he was elected is because people were tired of the status quo and they wanted an outsider. They wanted a businessman who had gotten rich. Not a Bloomberg. And by the way, Bloomberg has just pledged $500 million to help Latinos vote in this country who are here illegally. Isn't that special? It's all a big game. It's all a destiny. And I still maintain and advocate, and I don't care who disagrees with me, that people should vote. If you don't vote, you don't have an opinion. Now, I realize that whether you vote Republican or whether you vote Democrat, because that's the only two choices you have in the two-party system, we're still headed down the same way. In other words, we are going into global government. Why? Because our Father's Word tells us that we are. But how they get there, in other words, how we get into global government, is another matter. And that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried about more rights being taken away from us to where we can't worship freely as we want. I'm worried about things like the Second Amendment finally collapsing. Like I said, watch some of these videos I've been telling you to watch about Katrina or Hurricane Andrew. And watch what can happen in no time. How quickly people can become like animals. Speaking of animals and college professors and science overall, I'm always astonished at the programs that I see when I dare to watch television and watch something like Nat Geo TV. Of course, I've said things about ancient aliens a number of times, but I'm always astonished to see how science, that is to say secular science, because it's certainly not Christian science, looks at the origins of man, or things like ancient cities found underneath the oceans, or the great floods which they claim have covered this earth. They always ponder it from the secular, fleshly wisdom point of view. They always think, how could this have come to pass? Well, it's written in our Father's Word concerning the catabole, or catabole, if you want to be more precise. It is told to us of these things, and of the flood of Noah, and other things, but they don't seem to see it. They even use words like flood of biblical proportions, or they even mention verses or scriptures from the Bible, but they always make sure to emphasize that it is mythical, even if they don't come right out and say it. They never really delve into the biblical text because they are unbelievers. If they quote scripture, they quote a mocked English translation, which is complete ignorance. They call upon uniformitarianism or neo-uniformitarianism, which they claim will give them the ability to look at the past and see what's going to happen to us in the future. They look at what's going on now, and then they look back to prehistoric times. And with this, they include catastrophism, or neo-catastrophism. That is to say that these catastrophes happen every several thousand years, and they're expected to happen. These are the people that are constantly telling you that Yellowstone Park is going to blow sky high and kill everybody in the United States, or that a mega tsunami is going to happen because of an island in the Cape Verde Islands, which will collapse into the ocean and send a tidal wave, a tsunami, inwards up the entire eastern seaboard up to 50 miles in. And they're always looking for the next big thing. And They always look at it from the secular point of view. Even if they do include the Bible, you can tell that they are not studied of our Father's Word. They have no clue about metaphors, manners of speech, or the Hebrew or the Greek. And they speak their theories, especially the secular ones, like evolution and catastrophism, over and over and over and over again, until their lies, that is to say their ignorant theories, become accepted as the truth, as if they were the gospel. And then they get picked up and taught in our colleges and mold the minds of our youth. And one thing that I find totally interesting is that these secular scientists, no matter what the subject is, whether it's El Nino, earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, typhoons, forest fires, droughts, floods, snow, green spring, it doesn't matter. They have one agenda which they keep pushing, and has been being pushed now for about the last 3 decades. And that is global warming or climate change. If there is any truth at all to climate change being man-made, it is not from what is being pumped into the atmosphere. Rather, it's from all the asphalt being laid down all over the country, all the cities and all the roads heating up and causing a hotter climate. But that is about as far as it goes, if there is anything. And we're not going to tear down all the cities, and we're not going to do away with the highways, because we have to use them to get around. You know, the earth is extremely resilient. You know, just go up to Mount St. Helens. In 1980, they said it would be, 50 to 80 years before anything was ever able to grow there again. In 1985, they were claiming that. But guess what? By the year 2000, actually even just months later, there were already trees starting to pop up. Now there are forests again where there had been forests before. And the people that harvest lumber went and planted new trees there, and trees popped up through the soil, and there are standing forests again in the area of Mount St. Helens. That's not to say that there are not still damaged areas, which will take longer. But there is growth there. The earth is amazingly resilient at how quick it can come back. And God, in His infinite wisdom, is not going to let man destroy the earth. If you ask me, all of these things which are happening, tornadoes, hurricanes, stuff, are probably moreover along the lines of God's anger towards mankind for being as stupid as he is. Now, these things have always been hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, but people have moved into areas where they have not lived before. And, of course, as you chase God out of a nation, then God takes His protection with Him when He goes. So, guess where that leaves you if something bad happens? These scientists constantly claim that man has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. They believe in caveman. You know, the evidence that they find is inconclusive. They claim it's conclusive. The skeletons that they show are clearly those of some sort of hominid, some sort of ape, moreover. But no, to them it's a man, because they can stand him straight up instead of bending him over. No, they're sure it's men. So they throw the Bible completely out the window and follow their secular scientific point of view. And they claim that the elder races of men, which never really truly existed, were destroyed by climate changes in the past. Well, gee, I wonder how they had climate changes in the past. They didn't have automobiles. They didn't have gas engines. They weren't coal burners. In other words, these people look everywhere but to real science and to God for the answers. You know, God created man, And he gave men minds to think with. And men don't really use that gray matter to think too much. Instead, they seek their answers as Cain did, from the flesh. And they look everywhere but to God and to the Bible for their answers. And of course, once they postulate a theory, and the theory gets spoken enough times, like any lie told enough times, it becomes a truth. It's no truer than it ever was, but it is considered the truth. It is accepted as the truth. So, I guess that's about where I will end the rant portion of this, and I will answer now some questions that have been sent in to me. I have chosen a few here because I haven't done a Q&A in a little while, and I haven't got too many, but I'll answer some. So, we'll begin with question number 1. Dear Bruce, how is it possible that Cain's children and or some of the giants survived the flood of Noah? Okay, that's a very good question. It is possible one of two ways that the giants or the children of Cain survived the flood. This we do know. They did survive the flood. Okay, how do we know that? Well, there have been giants found all over the world, and they have been found even in recent times. So this either means there was another second influx, or they were not all killed. A large part of this hinges on the word for world or earth, world in this case of Genesis chapter 6 and 7. The word is eretz. Now the word eretz can mean a nation, or a plot of land, an allotment of land, a region, a large country, or it can mean, in fact, the entire world, depending on its usage in Hebrew. It is my personal belief, if you want that the flood of Noah was not, in fact, worldwide. Because there are records speaking of the flood around the time of Noah, which can be found in other parts of the world. There are also giants that are found in other parts of the world, and we know that the Kenites made it through the flood. So, it is my guess that Cain fled to the land of Nod when he was kicked from the garden, and that of course is in the Orient, and he and his family, or his children, offspring, were saved from the flood there, as were some giants who fled the area, probably with the help of their fallen angel parents, fathers that is to say, because their mothers of course being human females. But that's the way I believe that they survived the flood. Now, Pastor Honor Murray teaches these two theories as well, but he also teaches that the 2 of every flesh were taken aboard the ark, and that would include 2 of every giant or 2 of every Kenite. In other words, it doesn't seem to me that only 2 people would be enough to start an entire race of people. But when you consider mixing, then yes, it is possible. But they have to have someone to mix with. So that is why I believe that the flood of Noah was not in fact worldwide. However, it is possible that the flood of Noah was in fact worldwide, and that they were carried aboard the ark. But the more logical conclusion in my mind is that the flood was not worldwide, and some of them simply fled to other parts of the world. And the next question would probably be, well, why would God allow that if he sent the flood to destroy them? Well, they have a negative part of God's plan to fulfill. The Kenites most certainly do, and the giants also had a portion of God's plan to fulfill. In other words, they were all in the land of Canaan, and the Israelite children went in and slew them, as God instructed them to do. You know, people try to tell me that God was genocidal for killing off people to the last man, woman, and child. But he was attempting to do away with that seed line. And of course, as we know, there is the disease of gigantism in the world today. There have been a lot of people that are larger, 7 foot tall or more, and in Sardinia, it is claimed by the Sardinian people that their ancestors fled the land of Canaan. That is to say, were kicked out of the land by the Israelites. So you can take that for what it's worth, but that's how Cain's children survived the flood, and the giants survived the flood. One of those two ways. We know that they did survive because they are written of well after the flood. And they're all alive and well, as clearly made manifest today. Next question. How do we know when Passover is yearly? Okay, very simple question. How do we know when the Passover is yearly? All you have to do is go on the internet and look up when the spring equinox occurs. Okay? 14 days after the spring equinox every year is the Passover. So it's as simple as that. Some people choose to celebrate the Passover on the eve of Passover. That is to say, the evening when Christ gave communion to his disciples. Some people choose to do it on Passover Day, the day that Christ was crucified. It really matters not to our Father, I don't think. I believe he will honor it either way, because we are celebrating at Passover, and other people are out celebrating Ishtar. And that's another thing that we could get into. I'm not going to say that everyone that celebrates Easter is evil or is doing something horribly, horribly wrong. They are feast days which God did not call for, Easter and others that men have made. But just because you celebrate Easter doesn't mean you're going to hell, especially if you love the Lord. It just means you don't know when the true Passover is. So we're not to sit in judgment of people. We are to warn them, and we are to show them, if we can, which day is the right day to celebrate or which season. But just because a person celebrates Christmas or Easter does not make them pagan or ignorant. I mean, God himself, the Christmas was celebrated basically at the Feast of Lights, and it is the time when Christ was put into the womb of Mary, his mother. So Christmas holds a very special day for us, and a lot of times we take communion on Christmas to celebrate the beginning of Christ dwelling with man, that is to say, being conceived on that day. So, before you sit in judgment of somebody about what they celebrate, remember where you were before you knew. So, next question. Dear Pastor, I don't really term myself as a pastor. I consider myself to be more of a seed planter. I will say I'm a teacher, but I'm not formally a pastor. I have no degree, so I just want that known. But nevertheless, the question, isn't Cain just a metaphor for the evil that men do? In other words, the flesh side of men. And how could have Cain become a race? Okay, good question. Cain is somewhat of a metaphor for the evil that men do. However, Cain is a living being. And Cain did bear children, and those people did become a race called the Kenites. And you can look that up in the Strong's Concordance under G7013, 7014, and 7017. And you will see that it is Cain and Keni, or Cani. Cani being the children of Cain, the sons of Cain, an Oriental tribe, obviously, land of Nod. And Cain, or as it's written in the Strong's Cajun, being Cain himself, and being the patriarch of the children of Cain. So, yes, you could say that Cain is a metaphor, the way of Cain, that is a metaphor that the evil that the flesh causes people to do. In other words, them giving in to their fleshly desires and the wiles of the flesh. But no, Cain was very much a real person. He's not just a metaphor. He is very much a real person, and his children are very real, as this little rant and current events talk has been speaking of. Question number 4. Dear Bruce, I am worried about my past sins, even the small ones. A pastor told me that if you have committed one sin, you have committed them all. He said a balloon may be popped by the forks of a hammer with a single blow, or by the prick of a pen. He said, so also is sin. Is this true? Okay. In the manner of speaking, let's use common sense here. All right. Is the sin of cussing as bad as killing someone? The obvious answer should be no. Is the sin of looking on a woman lustfully but not actually committing the act as bad as incest or rape? The answer should be no, it is not. So I don't know where your pastor is getting his logic. I think what he was trying to probably tell you is that all sins are sins. But one is not necessarily as bad as the other. There is even a biblical verse which says if you've committed one, you've committed all. But that's not what it truly means. It simply means that sin is, or that the wages of death is sin. In other words, if you sin, you're going to pay for it. Unless, of course, you have a change of heart, you turn unto our Lord Jesus Christ, and you ask for forgiveness earnestly. So, he can use the pinprick or the hammer analogy all he wants, but you're not going to tell me that gluttony, which is a sin, or certain other things which are smaller sins, are as bad as committing murder or committing rape or doing other things which God's not going to fail if you're a true Christian. Okay? If you know who the Antichrist is, if you know about the tribulation, that the false Christ comes first, you're not going to fail. You're not going to find Satan enticing or deceiving at all, except maybe if you have doubt in yourself. I know that when it gets real, yeah, a lot of people will begin to question a little bit. But put your faith in God that He's going to guide you through it. Again, we will have the 2 witnesses, and you're not going to have to worry about failing. You're not going to do anything but be there. God is going to be the one who speaks through you. It's not you that's going to speak against the Antichrist or his railing crowds of followers. It will be God's own voice uttering through your body. So don't worry about it. Don't feel you're going to fail. Don't be so hard on yourself. Study our Father's Word to show yourself approved. It's the best thing you can do. Use the tools afforded to us. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, the J.P. Green's Interlinear, the E.W. Bulger Companion Bible, the Smith's Bible Dictionary, and the good old King James. And when you go to study, pray to our Father to ask you, to guide you. I meant to say ask our Father. Pray to our Father and ask Him to guide you in His Word, that you may know the truth, that you may discern the truth. And ask Him that when your time comes to be delivered, that He speak through you. I assure you He will. And that He will give you the information you seek. At least your portion of it, whatever job He has for you. You may not even be delivered up before the Antichrist. You may only be delivered up locally, or you may be delivered up to a Sanhedrin somewhere, or you may even go up the chain and be in the process as the whole thing comes crashing down around Satan's feet and Babylon falls. Don't worry about it though. God's got your back. God has promised, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So stay in His Word every day and use the aforementioned tools to study our Father's Word. Pray before you study. And brothers and sisters, always remember to pray for those that walk in darkness, because God knows, especially now, they are the ones that need it the most. Until the next time we see you, May God bless you, and thank you for listening. This has been Just Thoughts.